Let's talk about updates. In the modern era of gaming, it's extremely common for games to get updates all the time, even if they're not multiplayer-focused games. Nowadays, it's extremely common for games to get patches and updates on the first day that they're out, to fix bugs and glitches that the developers couldn't find. For multiplayer games, it's a common sentiment that if your game isn't getting updates regularly from the developers with new content, then the game is dead and not worth touching. Even if that's... no. But what's the point of putting new content and fixing the old content of a game that's already out? Like, if your game costs $60 on launch and the customer buys it, why add more things to the game for them to play with? It doesn't really make sense. Well, apart from it being a cool thing that makes players feel good because they've got more stuff to do in a game they like, you can actually get more money out of them by selling the updates to people for more money. Truly a genius concept that's never led to anything bad. DLC, or downloadable content, is a common part of video games right now. It's expected that most AAA games eventually get some sort of paid DLC that adds more onto their games for players to experience and to sap more from their wallets because God knows the industry needs more money. But what about competitive games? Most multiplayer games currently focus on maintaining a competitive ecosystem, so they can expand out into esports and get more money that way. So how do you add content to these kinds of games? Well, games mostly do different things, but let's look at the games that aren't fighting games in order to figure out how they do it. Buy skins, buy skins,
Consume,
buy
gamble,
skins,
buy
buy
skins,
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 buy
buy
skins,
skins,
gamble,
gamble,
buy
skins,
skins,
gamble,
buy
consume,
skins,
gamble,
gamble,
buy
buy
skins,
skins,
consume,
buy
consume,
skins,
consume.
I'm sure this has had no negative repercussions for anyone ever. While the rest of the industry is doing whatever the fuck is going on over there, fighting games have been pretty slow to adapt to the DLC and skin sale models. Why is that though? Like, there are still fighting games that sell skins, and there are some that even have loot box-like systems, thanks NRS. But most of the genre seems to be lagging behind on the abusing FOMO to sell skins for characters you barely even play. But why? Well, it has to do with where fighting games came from and how it's taken them a really long time to break away from their roots. So in order to look at the present, we need to look at the past. Do any of you actually remember the arcades? Is my age demographic old enough for that? By the time I was born, the arcades in the north of the UK were basically completely gone. Now if I want an arcade experience, I have to go to places that intend to replicate them instead of just being genuine arcades. Anyway, arcades were the birth of the fighting game community. Two buddies arguing about who's better in a game, playing a set, one of them goes home victorious and the other one goes home salty as fuck. Tale as old as time. But here's the thing about the arcade machines. It's really hard to update the programming on one of these things. Unlike consoles where you have the majority of the computing power in one device, and then you just have a cartridge or a disc that you put into the machine in order for it to do certain things. Arcade machines have boards that hold the game and do all the computing power in order to display them on a massive CRT that's also built into the box. This not only means that they were hella expensive to make and buy, it means that if you wanted to change anything that was in the game after the game was shipped, you had to remake all of the arcade boards for every arcade machine that was made, ship them out to the arcades that bought the boards and the machines, probably also send somebody out who will be able to switch the board if the arcade didn't have somebody to do that, and then the update is applied. Now, you can probably imagine this costs way more money than it's worth, so what do you do if you want to upgrade your game? What if you want to change the way systems work so players stop complaining? What do you do if you want to remove this game-breaking bug that someone found? What do you do if you're a video game company and you want to sell more arcade machines but don't have a massive budget to make a new game with? Well, let me let you in on a little secret. You just take that old game, give it some new characters, maybe a new mechanic, and nothing too hard to add. That'll add a lot to development. Something easy to make, you know, like spending a bit of that meter to do something else, fix some bugs, tweak a few numbers, give it a new title, and boom, my Capcom cosplay is complete. This is a title update, a way to sell a new arcade machine of an old existing game with new content. Capcom kind of went crazy with these for their fighting game franchises, with Street Fighter 2 going a little bit overboard, and by a little bit I mean we needed to cut them off. Title updates generally have new characters, stages, updates to old characters with things like new moves and tweaked balance, and sometimes have new universal mechanics depending on the title update. Title updates were massive events for fighting games back in the arcade days as they enabled players to have new ways to play their favorite games. They were extremely effective back in the day. So effective that some games still have title updates to this day, packaged with their major updates. People were calling the Strive Season 2 update a possible title update when they talked about it. Is it going to be a title update? Probably not, but who knows, right? While title updates were amazing for the arcade scene, as they were simply new versions of the old game that still cost the same amount of money to play, they weren't seen as fondly in a completely different scene. I'm of course referring to home consoles. Fighting games have been ported to home consoles for almost as long as fighting games have been a thing. The idea of being able to play your favorite fighting game in your home anytime you wanted was a big thing at the time. Nowadays it seems like a stupid thing to think about, but you gotta remember that there was a time when home consoles were nowhere near as powerful as arcade machines were. The gap in power led to this weird phenomena too. See, since arcade games are made on custom hardware, the developers didn't have to compensate in order to make the game they wanted because the boards would suit the needs of the game. There was obviously specific limitations such as data constraints and what the bigwigs upstairs would let them get away with, but what you compared what they had to work with on the consoles at the time, it's night and day, honestly. Because of this, changes to the game needed to be made in order to make sure they could work on home consoles. This meant that ports of the games were generally different between the arcade and consoles. Even up to the PS2 and Xbox era of consoles, having a fighting game be arcade perfect was extremely rare. This meant that these games wouldn't have title updates due to them being different, right? No, that's not how that works at all. Title updates on consoles have been a thing for a very long time. Even though the games weren't arcade perfect for a long time, they still added things like characters and maps for new people. However, since they're technically a new game, they come out with a price tag of a full new game too. So even if you were to buy the first version of the game, once the second version of it comes out, you had to fork over another full $60 in order to get the updates, even though you technically own the first game. This happened for years, and by years, I mean, they were still pulling this shit on the Xbox 360. How did you get away with this for so long, hello? I didn't buy Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 because my parents bought me Marvel vs. Capcom 3 a month before it was announced. Fuck you, Capcom. There was a chance that you could simply buy the upgrade between versions, and some games had free version updates that could be downloaded, but this was rare. Until recently. In the last console generation, it became much more common for developers to simply patch in the updates to the game so you don't have to pay in order to mess around with the new changes and play with everyone online. This means that the player base doesn't shrink every time you update the game because they get to try out the new things without spending another $60. But how do fighting games devs make money from the updates then? What if we take the characters we're gonna put to the game and make them cost £20? It's genius! Welcome to the modern day of fighting game DLC, where the title updates are free, but the actual characters aren't. This means that instead of spending $60 for the entire game again with new system mechanics and characters, you get the system mechanics for free, and the characters are paid for, which is a much better system because A, it's much cheaper because we're not buying the same fucking game again, and B, adds more emphasis onto the new characters and causes them to generate more hype or more disappointment if the character you wanted doesn't get added to the season pass.
I just want Slayer Axis, please!
This shift in the way that the updates are distributed, while in my opinion is a net good, does lead to some new problems. I know it's pretty late in the video for it to be getting to the actual title, but fuck you, it's my video, I can pace it however I want. There's 3 big issues that are caused by the season path method that the title update method kind of avoided. Let's go over the biggest one that you've probably experienced at some point. In most fighting games right now, if you don't own a DLC character, you cannot use them at all in training mode. While this does logically make sense as you can't pick the character in any mode, it leads to an issue where you can't use them in training mode, so you can't lab out specific matchup techniques. Are you losing to a Gold Lewis and want to lab out some things to figure out punishes and weaknesses in his game plan? Tough shit, that'll be $5.99 to select him in training mode and never actually play him. This problem has been fixed in some games by letting you set the dummy to be the character, but it's still a really annoying thing that persists in most fighting games. Due to the fact that you can't lab, for competitive players, the season pass turns from you can get this if the characters that are in it are ones that you want to play, into you need to buy this otherwise you won't be able to learn any of the matchups from the DLC. Which kind of feels bullshit, and it basically adds an extra £20 to the game if you want to compete in it. Developers are very obviously aware of this as well, because some of them lock specific tools that competitive players need behind a season pass paywall. Why the fuck is Tekken 7's frame data paid DLC?
You what?
Like, seriously, they made a season pass and put the fucking frame data for the game in the season pass. Like, hello, Bandai? Your frame data is accessible on the internet for free. Why the fuck do I need to pay £5 for it in-game? Are you high? While this is the only example of this I've personally seen, it shows that devs are willing to try and get more money out of you for bullshit that should have been in the game at launch by putting it on the DLC store for money. If you're a Tekken player, please don't pay for the frame data. This shit is insulting, bro. For real, what the hell were they thinking? Finally, there's a trend with DLC characters that persists for years now, and it's only been getting worse as time goes on. DLC characters generally end up being better than most of the base roster characters in the game. There's a term in game development known as power creep. To oversimplify it, it's basically as a game's lifespan goes on, the developers add more and more to new characters in order to make them more interesting and unique compared to the previous ones. This generally means that old characters need to have things added to them in order to keep up with the new characters. A lot of times though, devs forget to do the last part, and you end up with a completely imbalanced game where the base characters in the game do jack shit compared to the shiny new DLC characters that absolutely wipe the floor with everyone. Look at any top fighting game right now, apart from Strive, and you'll see how as the DLC seasons go on, the characters get more and more bullshit. You can say there's a conspiracy by the developers to make these characters insanely strong, so they'll sell like crazy, but honestly, I think the devs are either just stupid or more likely just get ahead of themselves while making cool shit. Because who doesn't want a character that has a laundry list of ways to make you into the grave? That shit's fun. The modern age of DLC is pretty decent, and while fighting games definitely have their fair share of bullshit, our genre seems to have gotten off the best when it comes to the microtransaction-ridden hell that we live in today, for now. So next time you're in bracket getting zoned out full screen by a happy chaos, just think, man, I'm sure glad I didn't have to pay another $60 for this. But seriously, devs, you need to add a way for me to be able to lab this shit for free. I'm broke, dude. I can't keep buying these DLC characters. Please!